Ah oui, c'est là que je dois dire quelque chose.
C'est parti. C'est parti, c'est parti.
Alors, c'est parti.
Okay, so it's starting. So hello, everybody online on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. Lots of technology we're using. So I work for a federation in Brittany. I'm moderating today. So it's great to open this session on resilience of food systems in the current situation. Okay, I've got an echo. So we've got various different perspectives on local systems and resilience. We've got entrepreneurs, activists, researchers, citizens who are interested. So thank you everyone for being here. So for more than a year, more than a year ago, we decided to get together for this exchange. So they were quite visionary after that meeting in Ouagadougou. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have had to be resilient ourselves. We've had to organize a virtual forum, although there are some people in Burkina Faso following this. So we want open discussions, people's education. So we want to get together, even in small groups, of course. So the constraints force us to do this virtually. So we've got hundreds of people who've registered for today. Thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you to all the people who are participating and speaking. We may have some technical problems. So this is quite an experimental situation that we're dealing with. We are an organizing team. We've been very active on this issue. This involves the Teralim group, specializing in territorial food sovereignty. Inglalin also, that works for fair trade, especially in Burkina Faso. The Brittany Solidarity Federation, which is a group of associations interested in international solidarity. The AMA group that does exchanges with Brazil, and also FRCIVAM from Brittany, an association of development groups involved in agriculture and food. So this team was funded by very committed people. So the Regional Council of Brittany gave special support. Also, the Doré Collective in Brest, Morbihan, and various companies have supported us. Thank you to the Forum Origine Diversité et Territoire that was represented in the first session yesterday. That was a great inspiration for this forum. Thank you very much. Thanks to François Pabeuf, also our webmaster. So now is the second session. So what we're looking at here is an exchange. We would like to hear, so our YouTube has various contributions. So thank you in advance for your questions. We're trying to make it interactive today. So don't hesitate to ask whatever's on your mind. Sorry in advance for any frustrations. We'll certainly do our best to take everyone into account. So this forum today is just one step. We want to continue a discussion face-to-face when we can. So everyone will have about 5 minutes now to introduce themselves briefly and introduce some strong ideas on our subject for today. That's food resilience in the current situation. So we have suggested some videos that go into much more depth. So now Luc Bodiguel, who is a head researcher in sociology and other areas at CNRS. Hello, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you to the organizing team. I'll introduce myself. I am a lawyer by training. I mean, the other descriptions are great, but that's really where I'm coming from. I work a lot on the issues of agriculture and the environment, and for several years, I've been working on local governance in food. So since 2010, we've been looking closely at food and territorial food issues in France. So it's been a bit frustrating, actually. So I like to be on the ground to see firsthand what's going on. So we've had less official research groups. There's been working a lot recently, doing surveys on food in relation to the coronavirus. So Anne-Cécile, you'd like to me just introduce myself and talk a bit about my vision of resilience, is that right? Yes. So as you will have seen in my video, the first part is quite technical, so you can go through that quickly if you want to go to the heart of it. Then there's the second part. There are points for reflection. So from a legal perspective, what is resilience then? In a sense, it doesn't really have a particular sense. It doesn't have a particular importance, and it's not been written into the law. So what would that rule be if there were such a rule? But in the video, as I say, there's something important. If we want resilience, we shouldn't look for that in new laws. This is a time of crisis, so there are laws that make an exception. We should use the tools that exist. The words used in rules, and we need to make them evolve. I'll give an example. Environmental cases amongst farmers. We felt that we were forced
environnementales dans les baux.
We've always tried to put environmental clauses in.
Donc il faut bien penser à réinterpréter les notions.
We need to reinterpret.
C'est quelque chose dont j'ai pas parlé dans la vidéo, mais je pense à
I
la
didn't talk
dernière.
about this, but I think there was a constitutional verdict that might, for the first time, recognize the protection of the environment at the same level as freedom of enterprise. So these are things that are already in the text, and you just have to have a slightly new vision of those to use them. So we're talking about ways to adapt to the crisis, but we need to see quite how we can use what exists. Another example. So in resilience, we always talk about public markets.
Comment on fait pour dépasser
So
l'obstacle?
what can we do to get over a clear obstacle in public markets for local products? What do we need to do and how? So this relates to questions of discrimination. There is inequality between actors in the market. We need to ask, what is a local product and what is a quality product? I'll come back a bit later with other stuff. Anne-Cécile, I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. You're doing very well. That was very succinct. Add a last idea if you want. A last idea. There's another one that I did mention in the video. For example, the law can be used to organize new forums for thinking about resilience. How can we bring together these spaces for dialogue for normal times and periods of crisis? We need some continuity. Today's crisis is perhaps one of many more to come. How can we link all this together regionally? Maybe we need a regional committee on food systems. There are some things quite close. How can we put that together? So there are in territorial projects. How can we make sure that we have proper objectives? So it's not just Agenda 21. We need to set up real territorial food systems, and how can we do that? That's a question. Thank you, Luc. So we've got a few questions there. So you can put them in the chat. We can come back to them during the discussion. So Marie Cosse. So Mariette, it's over to you. So please introduce yourself first of all, and then give us a few key ideas. Hello, everybody. I'm coming from Orfeuil, who couldn't be here. So I'll talk a bit about the video that was prepared. I'm Marie Cosse. I work for the Resolis group, created in 2010 to strengthen concrete programs by people working on a day-to-day basis for food systems. So these are on-site initiatives in France and abroad for a food and agricultural transition. We have, this year, we've published a report on initiatives by large agglomerations in response to the pandemic. I'll just try to summarize what Henri said in terms of resilience. Resilience is an immense term. So there's been a shock to the system. So this, at the moment, it's going against future resilience. So we need a global approach covering all branches of the food structures. Now, Henri asks a question. Food resilience and the problems that the food system itself can raise. So our food system is part of a long historical process, often characterized by chemical inputs and various flows. So to resolve local ethical problems, so it's been accentuating global flows, so people have been asking for resources around the world. So there's a process that has made us very dependent on international flows. And there are various problems that arise in the value chain and in distribution among different actors. So this system has been denounced for its environmental, social, and health impacts, and also in terms of justice and public participation. So finally, the question arises of the resilience of this food system. So not just in terms of the current COVID crisis, but there are other problems, more cross-cutting issues, so resources and the environment and so on, and social justice. So those are the main points. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Marie, for this presentation. We will answer questions later on and give the floor to the representative from Grenier d'Abondance, who will tell us about the experiences and vulnerabilities. Lucile Giquel, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this roundtable. I'm Lucile Giquel. I'm a volunteer at Grenier d'Abondance. This is an association that deals with food resilience and does public awareness activities and works with local actors. We have a whole set of tools also that are useful to take action at a territorial level. And you will be able to see our tools on our website. And we promote food resilience to make the food system to adapt or change, to adapt to unforeseeable situations, especially in these days. And we have summarized different threats such as financial crisis, climate change. Marie already mentioned this, that a food system is a very complex system indeed. We started off talking about food systems in the 70s, and it's a whole set of activities and different actors who have to produce, transform, transport, and consume food. As Anne-Cécile said, through a guide, which you can download from our website, we've published how to get food systems to adapt to the global challenges at a local and at a territorial level is the best level to take action on these big threats to the system. We have different resilience networks. These are very concrete actions that allow the regions and the different municipalities to take action and for the system. So to answer what the food systems look like today, what I can say with regards to the pandemic, which is affecting the world 2020, the lockdown measures and the lockdown of the national economy has deeply affected the food system. There is a lack of a strong decrease in agricultural production. Also, we've realized that there have been difficulties in food supplies as consumers. We've seen this in our supermarkets with a whole range of food products that were not available. And if this has led us to realize that we depend a lot on logistics and transportation, and there were not sufficient food stocks. And then for companies, agri-food companies and the distribution channels, and also for farmers who transform food, they've lost many of their clients, especially restaurants. So we need to reorganize things, and this reorganization must be based on initiatives such as short food circuits. It means consumers, for instance, who realize they cannot consume the product that's consumed in their territories because they were not available. So the whole system had to be rearranged. And what this also shows us, and we've seen this in the past 2 or 3 months, is that our food systems no longer met the first goal, which is to ensure food for all. We've seen this through food precarity. It's affected all of the associations which try to ensure that everyone has food. And we have seen these 8 million people in France who do not have food security guaranteed in France. As for the current context, the lockdown measures and the pandemic have strangled our food systems, but many people are trying to overcome the political and economic threats, but the other threats, loss of biodiversity, climate change, etc., if we don't act on these fronts, we continue to have an agro-industrial food system that won't be able to resist and meet its first and primordial goal, which is to ensure food for all. So that's a brief presentation, and I'll be delighted to answer questions later on. Yes, we'll leave that session for the Q&As. Thank you so much, Lucile, and I'm sure we'll go back to this later on. Next, I'll give the floor to Stéphane Linou, an expert on food resilience and national security. Stéphane, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Stéphane. Hello. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to see so many known faces here in this meeting. So very briefly, just to introduce myself, I'd just like to explain that through my activism and career in politics, I've always tried exploring the links between food and security. And we invented agriculture, and then to guarantee these crops, we came together in communities and villages, and that's when we transformed the space into territories, and that is where we started to go into politics. And after growing food around us, after guarantee this food in a municipality, in a village, we need to ask ourselves what the risks are we face today. If we look at how the political legitimacy of the mayors in the Middle Ages, where it was based on ensuring 4 types of security: external security, that was to build ramparts and protect ourselves and others; health security, to fight against pandemics; interior security; and food security was the 4th pillar, to ensure that there was enough food in the boundaries of the town or village. And they had policies to regulate, they had stocks of food, and in these societies, they organized around these different policies. There was a collective political responsibility, but there was also an individual responsibility, meaning that everyone had their little plot of land. It didn't stop famines, but at least it allowed them to do some things. And the establishment of very small-scale food infrastructures to feed the population and to instigate some shocks. Well, this was a collective political idea, but also these were individual initiatives, and we see that there were a certain set of needs that had to be met, which weren't guaranteed. And everything, at the end of the day, depends on the resistance of our. We've transformed our territories into open air plots where we've seen that we no longer have autonomy, and we're no longer empowered. So our territories became more vulnerable. They were less empowered, and we've opened the door to Ricardo's comparative advantages, which has focused on food production where the production has been distributed into the best areas, and then very often farmers have given up producing because they thought that food could come from other places, and the everything relied on the different food flows of food, but today they're very fragile, and that is why in 2008 I launched a movement, and during this year I tried an experiment of only eating food that was produced within a radius of 150 kilometers from my village to warn against the dangers of the global food systems. And I just imagine that there's something that blocks the food distribution, and I asked myself how long we can resist with the local production of food, and also because in the supermarkets we only have 2 days worth of stocks, and also very often another problem was that many of our small-scale farmers had disappeared, and the local production was very small, and it was unable to support this. So if there are no food stocks in the municipalities, and there are no state-owned strategic food stocks, so you have the population which is ill-prepared and then become frustrated. So this was my starting scenario, my initial scenario. So I then looked at the issue of local food, linking it to public policies. So the linkages between food supplies and public policies, because I wanted to know if our authorities had thought about production and whether food production can be a risk to security, and if through our government, our authorities understood this issue. So the specialized masters in food production, there was a geographer from Paris, and they took interest in the General Secretariat of the Defense Areas in Paris, and it was like a way of taking a temperature of the situation, and everyone thinks that others do things, but when the question is dealt with, so there's a huge amount of work to be done, and everyone thinks that others are doing the work, but the problem is that no two worlds share the same code. So this is by nature cross-cutting, but it's been siloed among the different administrations. So the reality is that COVID struck, and a senator from my area said, well, I'm interested in this. I could raise the issue in the Senate. And last year, she drafted a resolution on the food resilience. And the Minister of the Interior of France recognized that with the COVID-19, the likelihood was quite low of this happening, but the risk was important nevertheless. And just some months later, after this, the government itself recognized that indeed there had been warnings in the meeting, and public order was totally in havoc. So the government itself recognized that having food production and consumption that didn't come from the territory, together with the other risks such loss of biodiversity, climate issues of water and resources, and the hyper sophistication of food supply systems was a risk. It was something the government recognized, and the government said that food non-resilience at a territorial level can be seen with a lens of national security, and we had to foresee the situation and prevent it. So we needed to organize to avoid this. So sovereignty isn't sovereignty to do what others don't want to do, but to have the minimum needs met. And then there's a whole series of links. We have to protect agricultural land, and we have to look at the production modes. We have to look at the seeds, the mechanization of agriculture, and the food transformation systems, the training of farmers, logistics. So we have to revisit the oldest topic in the world, security and food, but in a preventive way. It's not security in the sense of repression. It's looking at creating an environment that can grant security. So I will leave it at that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much.
Je pense qu'il y a de toute façon possibilité d'aller plus loin en ligne, mais on va aller plus loin de toute façon dans la partie questions-réponses. Donc on a une dernière intervention.
I'll just say one thing. Joël Labbé was part of a group that was involved in this project. So it's the same project as me, so that's great to see you. So that fits perfectly. So Joël Labbé is here, he's at the center. François Laborde is the group he's in. So Joël Labbé, I'll pass the floor to you. Hello, am I connected? Yes, we can hear you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Stéphane, for the link. So that's the fashion, but it's necessary. So I work in politics. I'll start as I have before. We've been talking about the future of the CAP, working with the Senate and the Assembly. We need to put ourselves in the context of climate hazard and biodiversity threats. So farming has a heavy responsibility to bear. We need to take this into account now. It's in a global context. The global population is growing. It needs to be fed. We don't need to go and feed people. So there's support for development in the south, so they can reach sovereignty or security in food terms. So some small amounts of aid are given, but we need to go beyond that. the way we're working now affects countries of the south a lot, like West Africa. So the customs barrier. So food security in the south should be a big concern. I often talk about the word Olivier Duchuter's work. He wants us to stop impoverishing the countries of the south so they can have their own food sovereignty and security. We depend on soya from South America, 80% GM. So as has just been mentioned, we need to stop importing vegetable protein and we need to activate a national protein plan. We've been thinking about this since 2009. It needs to be done. So food products coming out of the big global markets, food is a right. So how should we act on this? It's not just like any other business. So looking at France and Europe and the food situation there, we need to concern, we're not autonomous. We rely on imports, as I said. So it's good that farmers are still there. So we see the same logic as Solagro. So we see it all come together. So the question of local food is key. We need to return to polycultural systems. So get away from monoculture. We need to get back to the forage system. And we need to rehabilitate various areas. We need an environmental balance and everything that can further that. That's been broken since the 50s with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So I'm not a pessimist. I am a fighter. We need to be optimistic, but combative. What are the possible solutions? Now, how can we implement food sovereignty? How can we make progress? We need this to be in the national context as well. We need to make this clear. We need to relocate our food. We can't just say, oh, you can't import or export anything. We need to be open to thinking about the territory. So the PATs, the territorial food projects, we need struggles in the Assembly and the Senate. And so Brigitte, and I was there, she's done a lot of work, and Jean-Luc was also involved. But in any case, we've managed to put these PATs in, so they're included. So they haven't become obligatory, they're optional in the law. But wherever this question is handled and addressed, so then these associations come up for defending the environment and also for consumers. So by 2030, 35, what can we do to make sure that the food consumed in a territory is made there? So this could be great for everyone. We need peasants, in fact. Peasant agriculture, re-irrigation of all territory, especially for peasant agriculture. And that's the future we see. And we need to, and it would be a disaster to have a fully industrialized agriculture in the future. So I was talking to some colleagues. So it's going to be hard to make this step. We need to work with public opinion. So that's what we're doing here in this forum. It's making us think together about public opinion. We need to make the public think. We need to get back to common sense. So we need to restart the peasant population. Land tenure legislation needs to be correct. So everyone who's interested in agriculture and food needs an opportunity. We need land tenure laws with a project for society to allow reconciliation between the urban environment and the rural, and also reconciliation between different human beings. We need solidarity and reconciliation between living humans and vegetable life and animal life. We need to respect their well-being. Thank you. So thank you so much for that. So you've done a lot of work. So that's really got our ideas bubbling. So these exchanges can help us all progress, I think. So Gilles Maréchal, I will invite you to speak. Maybe you can talk a bit about Brazil. So it's an international forum with exchange with distant areas. So Gilles. I noted a contribution from Joaquin in Brazil. He was saying that in Brazil, big soya producers export to Brittany. The price, and it's a staple there, has virtually doubled recently. This is linked to increased demand from China, which is the big, it's a big producer of soya. And international exchanges have a very destructive effect on food systems for citizens on the ground. So thank you, Joaquin, for that contribution. We've got a few questions to Luc Bodiguel and to Joël Labbé. So Luc, so there's a question for legal experts like you about the legal limits that the law imposes on the PATs, the territorial food projects. So how can researchers find their place in this work on the ground? And a very specific proposal. Someone asking, people working for food resilience, couldn't they be better recognized? So the first and the third are the questions I'm going to address now. So I'll put my lawyer's hat on. So the PATs. So these laws provide guidance. They're not hard laws. There are no real constraints forcing someone to create one of those territorial projects. So there's a big trend today for PATs with real obligations. So there are discussions going on about the formulation of the text, but broadly speaking, as such, you can't really bring in the law for these territorial projects to produce PAT. You can take an initiative. I mean, it's open. People bringing projects can be diverse actors. Depends on what the PAT is trying to do. It's on food systems at territorial level, but various models are open and different ways to organize are open. And they can be more or less effective. So lawyers would like there to be a document at the end of the road. So when people are committed, they're committed or involved. That would be like a contract. Are there any contracts behind this? So are there contracts? Is there real commitment? As far as I know, the PATs now, we don't have that. So sometimes there are agreements between different territories. So we see these are framework agreements. But so, I mean, it's all very good, but there's nothing obligatory. So there's nothing to stop an association working at territorial level on food systems to getting recognition. But what is considered in that way? So the environment, of course, is relevant. So we need enough weight behind us, enough proof to show that. So looking at the beneficiaries, the transparency, and so on, but this is a vital thing. We need to show that the food resilience is something that should be recognized as being of general interest. So this could be a big benefit in France. So third question, researchers.
Assez mal placé parce que c'est pas tellement les juristes qui sont doués pour ce genre de choses. Je suis plutôt en train de l'apprendre.
I think that so I'm learning about this from some people here. It's not my main focus. So when you get into this on the ground, it's good to understand how that works. So we can do more action research on the basis of observations in partnership with the actors. And this can be a source of reflection for them on their own practices. So there's a big debate on participative research that could be had.
Oui, alors merci.
Si je
Luc,
n'ai pas répondu aux questions, je peux répondre en
If that
off.
didn't answer the question, I can answer offline. Thank you so much, Luc, for your answers. We have Stéphane who'd like to take the floor to move back to ask a question to Marie. Yes, my question has to do with the legal aspects. It's important. It's always the relationships of power which create the law, and there's this FNSA Security Council, so it's a link between the nuclear submarines and supermarkets. And if we look at the supply chain, and when the production and consumption aren't territorialized, they have to, the stocking of supermarkets, they have to call on the police, which the police is overwhelmed. The police then calls on the national police, which is also overwhelmed, and then they call on the army, which has been weakened. So there's a continuum of security, and I've had confirmation of this by the militaries who participated in my study, and they recognize that the defense security continuum have overwhelmed. And so when we talk of national and domestic security, I don't have any inconvenience in talking about this subject with the defenders of neoliberal ideologies. I have no inconvenience because they want to reduce the state to its minimum expression and to regulate the minimum. I mean, justice, national security, and domestic security, that's all they want. If we sit and talk with neoliberals, we have to look at all of the elements of security. And if we recognize the things as they are, there won't be any problem, and the legal aspects will follow suit. So in my opinion, we must be radical in the sense that we have to go back to the root of things, and that's what history shows us. So I think we need to start from the starting point. Otherwise, we will depend on the market, and I think we need to be radical in this sense.
Merci Stéphane. Il y avait un complément de Joël sur cette question.
Thanks, Joël. I think wanted to add
Puis un complément de Lucile,
to
comme ça,
this
vous aurez le temps de réagir sur cette question-là avant qu'on passe à une autre question.
and then we'll go back to Lucile. Joël? Yes, very briefly on being radical. Indeed, yes, it's necessary because the threats are so great that we need a revolution. There is tough law, hard law, which has evolved, but as Luc said, there are no elements, and the territorial food projects can be taken on by the territories and adapted to the territories. And all of this is very interesting. And in territories that have territorial food products, it's because the politicians have been forced to do this by the public opinion.
On a un petit problème de son.
I think we have a small issue with the sound.
Oui, c'est bon.
Can you hear me now? Yes. And the other point was on research. Research plays an essential role, but it's not pure scientific research. We need global critical research, including sociology, which is never really included. We need to look at the evolution of population, and they always tell us we must trust in science, and that research works in silos, and we need to have a continuum, and we know very well, and organic farmers and researchers know that we have to look at research globally, and we need to deploy means in the Technology Institute of Organic Farming, but they are limited because there's a growing interest in working to support this combined collaborative research with the peasants working in the land. It needs to be a collaborative research. Thank you so much. Now we'll give the floor to Lucile to add something. Yes, I'd like to go back to the issue of general interest and association. We are an association that meets the general interest. It's a non-profit organization that has a set of beneficiaries, and this gives us the right, generally speaking, to defiscalize things, but we are very limited in our actions, and we need greater flexibility in this regard. Thanks, Lucile, for adding that piece of information. We have a question for Marie. I'm trying to group the questions. We are receiving many questions, so I'm trying to bring similar questions together. There's a question with regards to the work that is being done. What the milk resources are used by Resolis? Well, there are many things because each of these initiatives show us concrete examples of transition that are working well in the territories, that diversify production, that make production more sustainable. I would like to answer the question of resilience. We were asked during the first wave of lockdown, we identified many initiatives of territorial food projects, and what we've seen is that these initiatives, which are looking at alternative food production and distribution, they weren't very much affected by the health crisis. Obviously, to a certain extent, yes. And the impact was favorable in the sense that there was greater demand for these alternative production and supply chains. And it doesn't only have to do with short food chains. The health crisis has also meant that we have food producers and transformers who have established collective drivers for distribution and who have also found a space in medium and large supermarkets to distribute with fewer middlemen. So these alternatives do not just necessarily have to mean short circuit initiatives. Another thing we've seen from these initiatives is that the crisis has given greater visibility to their actions. There is greater awareness among consumers, but there was a lot of uncertainty at the same time with regards to how they could continue these activities and what would happen to these initiatives after the first lockdown. We've also seen many experiences in cities, and you can read more details on this in our website. But when looking at cities, they've there's also a closer link between the producers and consumers. We've seen the establishment of projects to map the different stakeholders and the different needs. There was also focus placed on the current distribution models in cities, and for 75%, because we saw very many volunteering projects, and in the city of Rouen, for instance, they created distribution point around the city to support the producers, and they've have invested resources and people to ensure that citizenship rules were respected. So I'd really encourage you to read further about this on our website if you want more information on what we do at Resolis. We want to stay optimistic because these territorial projects are very good. Well, it's a very general question, and we can see some of the actions that are being carried out at present. So thank you so much. Gilles mentioned the several issues, so I'd give you the floor now. I'd try summarizing questions addressed to Joël Labbé as a legislator. There is a series of questions on the common agricultural policy and how could the CAP influence, and would it be useful at a regional level? There's a second question on the food production laws. They'd like to know more about these laws. And there's a third question: what is the role of the societies in charge of distributing and allocating arable land in France? Safa is the name. There are other questions on Brazil, on the autonomy of the territories, and what could be the interest for each territory to be independent in terms of vegetable protein. It's a big question in Brittany, for instance, with regards to the imports of Brazilian soybeans.
Très bien, Joël, on t'entend.
Joel, please go ahead. We can hear you. Sorry, I didn't understand the end of your question, says Joel. There was a first question on the common agricultural policy, the role of the common agricultural policy, and especially when looking at the regionalization. Sorry, apologies. Joel's sound is breaking up. It's very impossible to interpret because we can't hear what he's saying. Okay. I think we'll need to mobilize actors. If we have antagonist forces, yesterday evening they were talking about how people have different views sometimes, and the Green Deal has to be, we need to be demanding and for states, and the Ministry of Agriculture in France has put forward a proposal that is being negotiated. But in spite of everything, the discussion has been tabled, and we'll have to wait and see. And then as to the regional implications of the common agricultural policies, the issue of decentralization is at the heart of the issue, and we need to move towards equality in Europe. We need single health system for all Europeans, and for us who consider ourselves to be citizens of the world, we would like universal health. Now, as to being independent in terms of protein in regions, we see the danger of these monocrops, and we see how because of monocrops, we have to, they have a huge impact on the population and the consumers of the South American countries. And as to the law on arable land, agricultural lands, we need to have something that will allow these SAFAs to know about land transfers. There is a financialization of agricultural land, and we need to fight against this. So it's an essential point.
Yes, that's a vital question. So just to add, tomorrow we've got a workshop on that question of land tenure, and also new entrants and transmission of agriculture. So that's going to go into more depth. So that's the key issue in that session. So that'll be addressed.
Une autre, je ne sais pas si quelqu'un avait des compléments par rapport à ces questions.
I don't know if anyone has something to add, or maybe we'll go to the next question. Luc? I'd just like to come back to the CAP, the CAP. I'm not convinced that the structural changes will mean that the state or the region will have more control. Now, if we make that choice, then it'll change. So in terms of how money is handed out. So that's the key, really.
Pour la question de la PAC, c'est tellement évident et tellement simple que.
So it's really quite clear, actually, as we've known for a while. So environmental integration, as they say. How can we tinge the way people act and the way they think about the environment? I think there are lots of pathways there. There's something that's impossible right now, but reattribution, and we need to drop maybe environmental charges in some ways. So can we work with groupings? Does that mean groupings then have certain environmental obligations? So we can look at the rules and also practice.
Après, on ne modifiera pas ces aspects plus pervers qui sont liés au marché foncier.
So we can maybe not so much working with the more perverse aspects linked into land tenure. Thank you for that addition. So action for citizens. So the question was, do we think there could be a call for boycotts? Could that be a lever for citizens' influence? And what kind of action do you think can be taken by citizens, by the public? Through associations. So, Marie, you'd like to start on that, and then we can take it. We can open it up more broadly. So, on the public issue, this comes up a lot. So, what can we do at our scale, at our level? It's a question of investing in it and taking some time, putting time into all these associations that work for resilience. Also, it's good to participate, look at the way you consume, adapt that, eat more vegetables. So then this will make the food industry adapt to your needs. Then also distribution. We need to consume in ways that promote distribution and supply at the local level. And also vote in a good way. So invest at your scale in associations that promote these initiatives. So Marianne will speak about this. There are lots of associations, lots of groups, lots of initiatives. So distribution, for example, there are more and more cooperative shops that are being set up to respond to these issues. And they're a small part of the food system. So that's worth looking at. That's what I have to add. Thank you, Marie. I've got something to add. So get interested in and find out about what's going on near you. There are lots of ways to consume better. Get involved in mappings, look at producers, local producers, work out what's important to you. So production conditions and so on. So what do you want to put on your plate? That's the question. So what type of diet do you want to have? Now, investment and participation in local groups. There are lots of local groups in small villages, to transition towns and so on. This can help get things moving at a very local level. So with the people around you. Also, you can invest in existing structures and also work with mobilization and awareness raising campaigns relating, of course, to the CAP. So this is taking out that awareness raising message. And also we can work on social media, social networks, to get this idea out, to spread it. Thank you very much. Another question. There's a theory of comparative advantage and export and the way markets work. How can we rethink trade exchanges for a more resilient and sustainable food system without falling into the local trap. Maybe Stéphane has something to say about that. If, or who else would like to take the floor? Well, so producing locally and so on. You need exchange, you need trade. Well, yes, we've always had trade. So salt and exotic products, so to speak. But there's another way to look at this. We need to change our focus a bit towards more autonomy. This would open options. So maybe there are things which aren't so sexy, but we need to just get things done, however we can. So we need to look at this failure-proof model to work against large disturbances. So in safe mode, so to speak. So there are laws of nature across territories that can dictate production. So we won't close off all exchange, but at least, I would say, we can protect what's most important to us. We need to flip a switch, really. There's a lot of food autonomy before than now. So people talk about, oh, Stalinism and central planning. So much goes to the international markets. And there are vital and strategic resources that are dealt with in that way. We just need to use some common sense and just change our perspective. So there's work to be done, definitely. So people might say that it's closing yourself off. So maybe you're going to try and grow tomatoes on a rock. Is that what you're saying? So we're talking about preventive work. There are international treaties. We need to look at those differently. There are two kind of excuses or reasons for not taking action in a certain way. So there's health reasons. So diseases, salmonella, and national security. And that's where we are. So we just need to use our common sense. So the needs we haven't changed historically. So what have we done with our territory? So for security reasons also, we can't artificialize soil for big projects. So we're going to have to choose, really. So what are we doing with land tenure? So we're talking about this nutrition and security are the issues. For security, just open a dictionary. Security is not repression. It's prevention and so on. We need an environment that provides us security to do what we need. So we need to change the filters we have in our heads. Thank you. And that's something to think about. So the forum is that it's saying we shouldn't fall into a local trap. We want to bring in lots of actors from Brittany, also people from Burkina Faso. So we want to share the issues and solutions. So we're not trying to turn in on ourselves. So I hope that through these exchanges, we can see all these paths of action that there are. So I hope we can benefit from this. I just wanted to put forward. So it's not just local consumption. We're proposing that there can be diversity in terms of livestock farming and crops. We can readapt territory. There are flows at a national level between territories. So olives, for example, well, they come from the south, not the north. That's always one flow. So each territory should be appropriate and diversified. So you can be much more resilient, taking into account climate change, which may have a big effect. Météo France has made an announcement. They're saying that temperatures will rise. So this can have a direct impact on big production areas by 20 or 30% or more. So we can be more resilient in this way. So that's what I would say. Looking at import-exports, so we can refocus on diversity. That will also reduce global flows and dependence on a particular country. So there's some countries that then have food independence, and they maybe export not that much. So countries that are exporting maybe energy crops can then become more resilient and independent. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. We have a question for Joël Labbé, which has to do with the current system. What are the plans that we could put in place to make the system more resilient? So this is a question that we all need to think about, how we use this plan to face the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you. It's extremely necessary, given even more so in the current situation. The Valence plan should make it possible for us to speed up the change, but unfortunately, there's been a discussion on this, but we haven't gained sufficient support. And we have to focus on research. And most cases, we are always talking of looking for alternatives, but research works in silos. And we are trying to change the model, but without changing, obviously, because there are huge vested interests. So the Relance plan, it's still being discussed, and they're asking for environmental conditionalities and the conditionalities of social and fiscal justice. But we are far from reaching agreement, but we have to continue fighting for this. Now, as to what citizens and NGOs can do, I who sit in the room, I see how the politics work, and I have colleagues who I respect and who are there legitimately because they were elected. If they very often these MPs are the ones taking decisions, and as NGOs, you can advocacy work with them, and in the media we need to work also so that citizens in a very peaceful way write to their senators and MPs, reminding them that they are there to represent the things and see how we can position ourselves. If the MPs feel this positive pressure coming from their population, their citizens, this will make them move and in their own interest. And if everyone can vote in good conscience, will come up with new majorities, which are very much needed to change policies. And I think there was a question that I left unanswered there. Yes, and no, thank you. It was you answered the plan relance in France. Yes, yeah, I'll leave it at that, says Joël Labbé. Okay, any other reactions on this? If not, I have a legal question, which perhaps is more suitable for Stéphane to answer. And Lucile, the issue of national security, what legal implications does this have for international agreements, international law, rather? How can we find subsidiarity between national legislation and European legislation? Perhaps you'd like to answer this question first, Luc?
Je vais essayer de parler.
Yeah, I'll try speaking. I'll allow Stéphane to answer the question on security because it's not at all my field of expertise. As for the subsidiarity, it's a very delicate topic, and very often it's more about looking at the competencies. Where can we act alone, or where we have to look at European legislation, and then obviously the states, depends on how states are set up, whether they are divided in regions or not. But I prefer referring to this in terms of articulating legislation. So we have on the one hand this new Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy and a common agricultural policy that doesn't match these at the European level. If we look at the European level, there's a lack of coherence, and the common agricultural policy, which we have today, does not match with the Green New Deal or the Farm to Fork. So we need to look at how this is implemented at the level of the states and what will be their choices in terms of environmental programs. Will we be investing funds and to overcome environmental and food challenges, or will they continue with the current distribution model under the influence of lobbying in France? I mean, it hasn't really changed. We have shared competencies, and if the indications are not clear at a European level, it'll then be up to the states to choose what their priorities are. And it's not clear that our states, and even more so France, are able to do this because what we've seen with the crisis is that the agrichemical lobbies and the oil and industry lobbies are great beneficiaries. Thanks for that. Stéphane, if you'd like to also try answering this question on the legal differences between international security and international law. Yes, if you look at the transatlantic agreements, the issue of national security was excluded. So the army, I mean, it's just if you look at this continuum between security and defense, I think our MPs have hard work ahead, and they should ask themselves whether this, when they talk of national and domestic security, the strong dependence on the flows and the fact that we have lost control over our production factors. If we agree on this, well, then we need to implement it and gain back control and make international treaties be aligned with this. I mean, we can't give up doing politics. It's a very important discussion, which furthermore could bring together citizens and consumers who they are also co-producers of security. Linking it to the previous question, consumers, when they buy a product coming from far away, they are producing local insecurity by failing to buy locally. They are doing harm to locally produced foodstuffs, and so the consumer is a co-producer. They have to for instance, public procurement through collective restoration and enterprises. Everyone is a co-producer of security with their purchases, but we need to look at all of the elements that contribute to knowledge and production, all of the production factors. General de Gaulle went to dismantle the Center of Intellectual and Defense Strategy. Why couldn't we do the same with food? And I'll leave our senator to answer that question. Why not do it the same? Because if we take the words of the President of the Republic in March, leaving our food in the hands of others is madness. And it's at the base of Maslow's pyramid, eating and drinking. So all production factors that are linked to food must be looked at from the lens of things that give security. And this has to be enshrined in the law. And if we look at international treaties like TTIP and others, we see that we need to be brave and bring this in. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for this positive message. I hope it's well received. We will take one last question. And with that, we will reach the end of this second session. It's a bit frustrating, I know, because there are many questions which won't have a direct response here, but we will be able to answer them in the chat. Sorry, can I give you a short example, says Stéphane, just to show you, going back to hybrid models and hybrid levels, necessary. Yes, so this was the last question. You're jumping ahead of time. No, but with regards to the role of policies, Mr. Gilbert Larguier, who's a historian of the modern era and with whom I worked, he looking at the archives of in the city of Narbonne, he saw an edict from 1779 which said that in certain plots of land, it was prohibited to grow vineyards. Why? Because these lands had to be for cereal. Why? Because they had the collective memories of something that had happened some years before. So the agricultural land was sacred as to produce food, and they also regulated the types of crops for security reasons. And the needs that to be met haven't changed. So at all levels, we have to look ahead of us and look at what counts the most in terms of the need to be met. And obviously, food is the first and basic need. Thanks so much. So now moving on to the last question. Has to do with something Stéphane said. We see that there's a strong move to recover these local initiatives. So how can we get these local initiatives to stop being so marginalized and scale them up?
De leur sens. Et donc, de la même manière, de manière un peu plus globale.
So in a global way, how can we get the issue of food resilience to not be reappropriated as the concept of sustainable development once was? So it's a global question. Just if you'd like to take the floor for some few last words, that would be great. And you can raise your hand to do so. So to take the floor.
I think Joël Labbé is trying. Yes, I'd like to start. So what can we do? As Stéphane was just saying, so we need to return to common sense on the security question. So there are all these European regulations applying across Europe. So European law must change. So we need to counter the ultraliberalism that is taking us the wrong way. We need to progress. We need to make progress. So there's mobilization to be done, and we need time. You need to give time. I would come back to the territorial project, to the PATs, the territorial food projects. They are trying to improve food sovereignty at a territorial level. So you've got local cells working. So the AMAPs supporting peasant agriculture are doing their job. We need a new parallel economy in territories, getting into legislation. We need better income for farmers. And we need to handle correctly big farming concerns and distribution companies. So we've lost you, Joël, for a minute. I'll pass the floor to Lucile. Hopefully, Joël will come back in a bit. Yes, I'd just like to add to what he was saying. I'd just like to say, for us to act, so the different territories, so the regions, the local councils and so on, they need to enable a parallel system across departments as well. So in each territory, it has to be possible to share good practices to strengthen initiatives Now, currently, those are at a very local scale, very individual. We need to share that, mutualize it, to share good practices. We need to be quicker also. Each territory has advantages. They can share experiences, so they can move faster, so there can be a complementary system to this agro-industrial system. Well, it needs to be linked. Thank you, Lucile. So back to Joël Labbé. So that's not working. So I'll pass on the floor. Oh, maybe we have him back. No. So Cosse for Resolis. So we had Orfeuil has also come in during the session. So marginalization.
C'est un peu toutes les questions que l'on se pose à Resolis, et notamment
So in Resolis, we need to know initiatives better,
leurs besoins, et notamment dans un
people's needs,
territorial.
with a territorial approach.
Quels sont les besoins?
So you've got activists on the ground. What do they need? What infrastructure do they need, for example? So be it vegetable growing or local market and so on. So then we can facilitate their local work. So law. We can adapt certain public market codes to favor local supply collectives. There's one issue at territorial level. So we need to get these into public policy at national, European, and local level for accessibility, be it relating to land tenure or other issues. We favor meetings between actors, so elected representatives with citizens. They're there on the ground every day. So together, we can put together action plans to resolve issues collectively. So I'm not sure if you have something to add there. That was very interesting. Just a word in favor of the CAP. We've got the PAX cap, so to speak. So people talk to each other politely. We're aiming for a transition. We're trying to re-territorialize. We've gone a long way in terms of globalization. We've gone too far, really. We need to get back on in terms of agro-industry and all the inputs, and also looking at forestry and trees and so on. So we want territoriality and local initiatives. So there's a virtual object that the WTO has been talking about. Back to 95. So we need compatibility with the WTO and so on. We need to revive territories in international claims. So associations certainly have a role to play. States, or indeed this French state, is more concerned with globalization than localization and devolution. It should take more care of its territories, of course. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to use all the transition initiatives we can. So we're trying to teach people about the transition. This is based on experiences. So this is to do with the transition movement.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, est-ce que Luc, tu souhaites
Thank you.
parler de-
Luc, would you like to say a final word on that last question?
La question, elle a une dimension.
This question has a certain dimension which is almost philosophical in nature.
Savoir comment
So how can
l'ensemble des initiatives
we could all these citizen initiatives and professional initiatives in local food be spread and resist the power of marketing, for example, of the big distributors? I find that hard to answer. So in the case about Frugal, so there are local projects, and many have been studied. So how important is the local factor, the local character, local group, local scope, and so on? It's difficult to say that a project can be taken from one place and put in another. That's hard. There are certain criteria that mean things can be reproduced. So what we see is that it's there really that we can work. I was saying this about the territorial food projects initially. We need to have the rules of the game in place for different partners. The situation is this: we've got private operators that have economic freedom to act. So we need to make a link, a lasting one. We need commitment. There's a big challenge in Terre de Sous, in Rennes. So you can look at Terre de Sous in Rennes. It's run by a community. So we need to articulate. And so what are the conditions for engagement for each actor? Thank you. So we've overrun. So thinking Joël might want to say something. So it's taken a few more minutes. I'm sure lots of people would like to know what he had to say. So just to wrap up, what can we do? We need to change the standards, the rules. We don't have time to wait, really. It's urgent. So on the question of food, that's the issue today. We need to ensure there's good communication. This is very interesting, what you're doing. So in the world of research and NGOs and agribusiness and so on, there are lots of people taking action. So there's a big business. So there are big agricultural unions or groups. But things still can make progress in local food supplies. We need to be organized. We need to organize at local level, set up a new economy with local restaurants, for example, using natural products from the local area. And these are ways to win. So the volumes will get bigger and bigger. And we're going to organize at territorial level. I think it really brings us all in. This is one of the solutions we're working towards. People say, oh, we're going to lose work, lose jobs, and so on. So if someone working for a big pork producer might move to a small producer, and their conditions would change in terms of earnings and working conditions. So we can also work from a legislative angle. We can impose, for example, 20% organic and a certain percentage of local quality produce. So in the Senate and the Assembly, this can be worked on. Of course, there's lots of lobbying going on. So we need to force local bodies to accept a certain percentage, 40, 50%, whatever. We need to fight for this. So this can trigger a whole localizing movement. And thus we can start a transition and then bring back diversity in crops and livestock.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for these concluding remarks. And thank you all for participating, the speakers and those who've asked questions. And you will also be able to watch the recording of this session. In the framework of this forum, we'll meet again at 6:30. We have 6 workshops running in parallel. There will be one specifically on citizen initiatives for food resilience. So feel free to register for them. You can find the registration link on the website. Tomorrow, Friday afternoon, we have a workshop on the transformation of food and sovereign resilience, and then another one on agricultural land. We will send you also a questionnaire to see what points we could improve and to see what other aspects. We know it's very frustrating to have this forum on a video conference, but thankfully we've had good connections. So thank you all very much. And with that, we will conclude the second session. If you allow me to just give some technical aspects, Cécile has given you the workshops are from 4:30 to 6 this afternoon. Thank you all very much and goodbye.